Welcome to another episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast. I am your host, 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁. During the day, I am a practicing retirement planner and certified financial planner with almost 25 years of experience. I am the founder of 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁 Wealth Management, where we focus on retirement planning for women over 55. But on this show, we discuss issues and topics that we see women face on their retirement journey. So whether you're single, widowed, divorced, or you are simply just ready to take control of your financial future, this is the show for you. If you want to learn more, ask a question, suggest a topic for the show, or even just join our weekly Simply Retirement newsletter, you can go to www.thesimply.retirementpodcast.com. Now, on today's episode, I hope it's a very special episode. I really hope it's going to bring some value to our audience. As of course you probably expect, I am very biased in my belief that most people should be working with a financial advisor or a financial planner, or at least have access to financial advice, if depending on your financial situation. But I'm also a very big believer that you need to find the right financial advisor for you. I like to say that everyone needs a financial advisor, but you don't need every financial advisor. And that means that you need to work with an advisor that understands your issues, your unique concerns, and your questions, but most importantly, has helped others just like you, help them answer the questions that you have, help them deal with the same challenges that you have. And I do not believe a financial advisor can specialize in everybody. The majority of our clients, they're in or very near retirement. They may have gone through a divorce or been widowed. We help women build a retirement strategy that ideally provides them dignity and independence throughout retirement. I know Social Security, I know tax planning, I know retirement income, but I don't know 520. I don't do a lot of work with 529 plans or college planning. It doesn't mean that I don't know anything about it. I just don't specialize in that. And the decisions someone is making at 65 are completely different than the decision that you are going to be making if you're 45. So to help with this topic and finding the right financial advisor to you, today I'm going to be joined by Lyndsey Monahan. She's a wealth manager with Precision Wealth Strategies based in Frisco, Texas. She focuses on the unique financial needs of professional women, women business owners, and most importantly, just my opinion, and maybe we can get into this a little bit, but the unique financial needs of a blended family. So Lyndsey Monahan, welcome to the Simply Retirement Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Eric. I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. I was very excited to have you on here. I know you and I have talked a lot about this over the probably the last year and a half or so. We've had this conversation about, different specialties and, finding the right financial advisor. But before we get into too much of that, I just want you to share a little bit about your background. How did you become a financial advisor? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I think it's probably well documented that anybody that becomes a financial advisor never really set out to be that person in life, right? So
I don't know what
that's
you're talking about.
the same story here. So my story, in order to tell a complete story, I'm going to start, and it's going to sound like way back, but I was raised by a single mom. And so I was a part of a blended family, raised by a single mom. And I always knew that money was a problem for my mom. And so we openly discuss this now. So yes, my mom knows I'm disclosing all this on this podcast, right? But
Good. I've done that to my mom, and she wasn't happy about it. So.
But so my mom was raising two daughters on a very limited income. And so we were always told no because she couldn't afford it, not because she didn't want us to have it. And it just kind of came out of that I never really wanted that for my family. And I always wanted to do what I could to help her and help other women kind of get through that. And so when I first set out in my career, financial advising was not even in the realm of possibility for me. I have an accounting and a computer science degree from Illinois State University, and I went to work for a big insurance company. And so I think most financial advisors also probably started out working for a wirehouse of some kind, right? And so I'm completely different in that matter as well. I went to work for a big insurance company and did property and casualty. I didn't do anything with financial services whatsoever. But what I learned there was that my coworkers were saving insane amounts of money and knew way more about money than what I did. And so when I started out, my salary was probably double what my mom made in an entire calendar year. So I knew that she couldn't really help me with personal finance. So I started seeking out information from my peers and those around me. And so that's really how I started my journey of personal finance. Now I'm going to fast forward pretty fast through the next couple of years, but while I was at State Farm, they offered me the ability to pursue my chartered financial consultant and chartered life insurance underwriter designations. I wanted to do the CFP, but that was not something they allowed at the time. So I took the next best things, right? when I finally got to a point in my career where I was debating whether or not I wanted to stay in corporate America or transition into entrepreneurship, becoming a State Farm agent was the way that I chose to do that. So I was a State Farm agent for a short period of time. And then I went through a series of massive changes in my life. So I had some personal trauma taking place. My father went through a divorce followed by a stroke. And while he was going through a stroke, I was also going through a divorce. And so just a lot of turmoil in my life at that time. And I chose to walk away from my State Farm agency. I gave that up and followed a mentor and friend to New York Life and became an insurance agent, a life insurance agent, and a financial advisor there. I did have to have some securities licenses as a State Farm agent. We sold some mutual funds and that kind of thing there as well. But that's really what got me down this path of becoming a financial advisor / planner, right? Is that I took that leap of faith and followed that friend. And from there, really fostered my career through New York Life, a couple other experiences in the industry. And then I started my own firm. And later this year, ended up joining forces with Precision Wealth Strategies. And that's how I got where I am today. So I'm really excited to be here on the show and talk about those experiences, because I think it's the more we talk about these things, you kind of get to see where your advisor's heart is and where they came from, right?
Well, and that's something that you and I have talked about. And I just realized as you were talking, our stories are even more similar than what I even realized, simply because, again, I was raised by a single mother.
Yeah.
Then my grandfather, who was my father figure, I never knew my biological father at all, period. But my grandfather was my father figure. He's actually the man I call daddy. But he passed away when my grandmother was 62. And I think that the story, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is tell your story. Those are the people that you realize you're most passionate about helping. And I think that, thinking about qualifications as a financial advisor, I think, the CFP, the CHFC, those are just kind of the basics of what we need to be doing for our clients.
Exactly.
But it really gets into how do you actually deal with the challenges of a specific group. But for example, I would love to hear just the kind of the basics in your case, when you talk about blended families, and I've told you this, that I think that's your story. And hopefully I think you've started to, you may completely agree, or you may still be having some questions. I don't know, but I've always felt like that's your best story. I can tell the passion behind it when you're talking about working with blended families. But what are just some examples? If somebody's in a blended family and they're looking to choose a financial advisor, what should they be looking for? Beyond the CHFC or CFP, there's more to it than that.
Right. I actually don't care if somebody has those designations, as long as they're qualified to talk about securities products with you or manage your personal finances. That, as long as there's somebody that is qualified and credentialed in the industry, that's all that matters, right? So blended families, to get back to your question there, I love working with blended families because I come from a blended family myself. And what I mean by that is my parents were divorced when I was under 12. My dad got remarried right away. And so I inherited 3 step siblings right away. And then my mom got remarried and I inherited 4 step siblings on that side. So yeah, I was one of a very big family of kids and we were all blended together. Some of those experiences were really good and some of them were not. And I think that that's one of the most important things about working with blended families is that the dynamics of blended families are very, very wide, very dynamic, right? They're very interesting. And you have to have an advisor that understands that not all the time are those things hunky-dory, right? Like a lot of times there's some ick involved in those things. And so it's important. Ick. It's so important to talk about those things because you don't want to ever make somebody feel like you're judging them. And I am always saying that to my clients. Tell me your stuff because I got to know the stuff in order to help you in the right way. And so fast forward in my life, I am now a part of a blended family as well. I have a 17-year-old bonus son, along with my husband, Byron, and my 3-year-old daughter, Stella. So we have yours and ours together, and it's amazing. But I think a lot of that has to do with my experience growing up in a blended family and our desire to make sure that we have a very cohesive approach to parenting and dealing with our blended families. So.
And what are some of the mistakes that you've seen blended families make, and especially, and it happens all throughout the relationship in many cases, right at the beginning, later down the road, but there's things that have to be done. what are some of the mistakes that you've seen throughout your career?
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones that I see is the when you are tiling an account together, or you're settling assets up together, and you use the joint tenants with rights of survivorship, right? That's the biggest mistake that I see. And it's not always a mistake, but you have to make sure that you're making deliberate choices with it. So Eric, I'm going to make us sound like we're cheating on our spouses here today, but if you and I are married, right? You and I are married, and Eric has children that he's bringing to this marriage, and I have children that I'm bringing to this marriage. If we have an account set up as joint tenants with rights of survivorship and Eric passes, I now have the ability to disinherit his children from any account that was jointly ours together under that designation, right? And that's a problem, right? Or it could be a problem, depending on, if I run off and I marry Ryan Reynolds and I don't want to give any money to your children, I now have the ability to do that, right?
Right.
And
Why do we
vice
always knock the
versa.
guy off first? I do that too. I always knock the guy off first. It's just easier that way, I
I feel
guess.
like they got to go first in a lot of things. So why not go first in that too?
Statistically, that's the way it is. So I guess it's just easier.
Exactly. But I think having a discussion about that is really important, because you want to make sure that you know what your spouse's plans are if something were to happen to you first, right? And how they're going to treat your children, and making sure that that's spelled out properly in your will, and that your beneficiaries are aligned the same way, is so important.
Well, let's touch on that one, because it's one of those things, because you and I are in Texas, and
Yes.
it's such a eye opener, and I'm sure you can share insight on this as well. But the big one about owning a house when there's family, where there's children from different past relationships, without a will. What happens with the house when you don't have a will, but you have children from previous relationships and previous marriages,
Yeah, it
and one
becomes really
spouse passes,
it becomes really
or
messy.
the man passes. Well, I'll knock myself off again, I guess.
Yeah, so the house goes to the spouse, right? And I think the issue there is how is it set up, right? Is it passing per stirpes, right? Or have you designated the percentage or named an heir on that property? It really matters in the state of Texas and other places, because we always want to assume it goes to the spouse, but that's not always the case, as you very well know.
Right. Well, and if you don't have a will, then the other half actually goes to the other children. So now
Right.
you end up owning, one spouse owns half the house and the children own the other half.
That's
That's
right.
always a really fun situation. So getting back into more how do we choose a financial advisor? How do we choose the right financial advisor for your situation? For our firm, we have what we call our Simply Retirement Roadmap process. And that is it's 6 very specific steps that we take each prospective client through. And it's really to help them make an educated and informed decision about our firm.
Right.
How important is it, do you believe, to have a specific and, more importantly, an identifiable process, so that if people are wanting to engage you as their advisor, how do they know what happens? What's step 1? What's step 2? How important do you feel like that is?
Right. I think that is critically important when you're working with a firm. We have our own process here at Precision Wealth Strategies as well too. But the most important part of that conversation, I think that's kind of where you're going, is that initial conversation with an advisor. You want to make sure that it's an interview that goes both ways, right? I'm interviewing the client because I want to make sure that you're a good fit for working with me and the firm. But I also want you to be doing the same type of evaluation to know whether or not it's a good fit for you to work with me or for you to work with my firm, because we all need to have a process outlined. Otherwise, how do you know where you're going when you're working with someone? You need to see that roadmap. I oftentimes draw parallels. I think it's probably from my P&C background, but I always want to know what that roadmap looks like. Where are we going? How do we get from where we are now to where we're going in the future? And that having that plan of action is so important.
Well, yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is, people are often intimidated, or they feel like they don't know what is it like to work with a financial advisor. And I think if you go into it with the fewer unknowns that you go into that process with, the better off you're going to be, and the more educated you feel like you can be. But I think that's where, for you and I, having that defined process of here's what happens, here's so that because especially when we're working with women. Unfortunately, I got messaged recently about it's actually a friend of a friend that said, hey, I have a friend that her husband recently passed away less than about a month ago. and she's needing help. She doesn't really know who to turn to. Again, is a story I'm sure you've heard. He
Yep.
handled all the finances, and he's the first to go, which is always why we use that example, right? Is that why the husband passes away first, and she's like, well, they wanted to find out if we help. Do we just do retirement planning, or do we do financial planning? What do we do? And that's a big question people have. And so, what from your perspective, how can we do a better? How can financial advisors do a better job of alleviating some of those worries and concerns about even just reaching out?
Right. I think it starts with conversations like this, right? Letting people know that we're real humans, right? That we're not always the person in the stuffy suit, or we're not always the person that is super intimidating. Eric, I think you were the anti finance bro. Just so you know, I always think that you're super approachable, so I just want you to know that. But I think that it starts with being authentic and knowing that the person you're talking to is an authentic human being and that you hear their story. So they should be willing to share their story with you. But then outside of that, being willing to ask the questions that they're not comfortable to ask, right? So if I have my spouse doing all the finances and I'm uncertain about it, I would want to encourage, I would hope that somebody would encourage me to ask the questions while we're at the table with an advisor, or reach out privately to ask those questions. One of the things that I always do with my clients that I'm sure you probably also do is I make sure that they both know, when I'm dealing with a couple, that you have access to me at any time to ask any question at all. You don't have to include each other in those conversations, but I will always ask, is this something that we can bring back and talk to each other about? Because it's so important. I'm constantly having those conversations in rooms with women that you need to know what your plan is. And I think I'm not going to say most, but I think a lot of financial advisors, especially those of us that work with women, we are always trying to make sure that both parties are engaged in the conversation, right? And we want to make sure that without a shadow of a doubt what's going to happen. And that if you don't know, or you're unsure when that time comes, pick up the phone and call me. You should have me on speed dial. I'm here for you to help in that capacity.
Well, that's actually something I recently added to our website. That's a question I'm sure I know you get, because I've referred people to you about, you'll have somebody ask, do you work with couples? Because, on both of our websites, it's very specifically focused on women. In my case, it's women over 55, retirement planning. For you, it's, again, the business owners, the entrepreneurs, the executives. But you'll get that question, do you work with couples? And the way I explain it, I say, yes, we do. But it is imperative that both spouses be actively involved in the planning process. It can't just be one or the other, and not even, it can't be just the wife. It can't be just the husband, either one. It has to be both. I stress that every conversation, if it is a couple, you both have to be involved.
Yes. And I feel the same way about that. I think that I'm really careful when I say about my marketing. I market a lot to women. And the reason for that is I want them to know that I am approachable for them, right? It's not that I'm not trying to have men as clients. It's that I want women to know that I'm approachable and that I'm here to help them as well too. Because I think so much of the financial industry perception, probably not the best word for it, but the perception is that the financial industry markets strongly to men, which there's nothing wrong with saying that. But I think that the more we see people out there in the industry, women, especially female advisors out here talking about how to be more inclusive and make sure that women feel comfortable sitting at these tables and asking the questions, the better that can be. So yes, I totally work with couples. I work with single men all the time. There's nothing wrong with them coming to me in those cases. I love to work with anybody, but I want to make sure it's a right fit. And like I said, I focus on women because of my story, right?
Right. Well, and I think unfortunately, that's a lot of where our industry, I think, has dropped the ball. Historically, that has been our industry, is older white guys in their 50s and 60s. Kind of right. Like where I'm approaching that as we speak, but I'm trying to delay it as long as possible. But that's kind of the way it's been, Bo. And that statistic that just still blows my mind. Even now that I think about it, that statistic that it's depending on what you're reading or listening to or whatever, it's somewhere between 70 to 80% of women will change advisors within the first year of losing their spouse, whether it's because of divorce or widowed, because they didn't have a relationship. Just like you said, they're they never either, and I put a lot of this on the financial advisors, to be honest. They never
Yeah.
reached out, or the wife can just be sitting there. I've heard these stories over and over again. The wife can be sitting there with the husband, and the financial advisor only talks to the husband.
Oh yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
like
I
they're
hear
not
those
even there. They
stories.
might as well just go grab a cup of go to Starbucks and just hang out and or go be with your friends if that's all you're going to get.
Right. I
But
hear
that's
those
why they
stories
change.
all the time. And I've had it happen to myself too, not in the financial realm, obviously because I'm in it, but we've had a pool company come out and give us an estimate, and the salesman spoke only to my husband, but like I'm the one making the decision, not him. And so I think when advisors get into that track, and in the first conversation with an advisor, if that's how they're going to treat you or not, they're not going to
Yeah.
change the deeper you get into those conversations. So
Right. Well, let's talk about that. What do you think are maybe some of the red flags? So you either on the initial conversation or even when you get to that first meeting, what are some of the red flags you think potential clients or people seeking financial advice, what should they be looking for that might say, hey, this may not be the right fit, or this person doesn't know me, or they don't know my situation?
right. So I think first and foremost, how did your spouse or significant other or you meet this advisor, right? I think it starts that early in the conversation, because if your spouse, I'm going to assume that we're talking about a woman, and your spouse has met an advisor out and about, and they've had conversations before you were brought to the table, that is a red flag in my book. Because most advisors I know that try to cater towards helping women or making sure that women are included in the conversation won't have an in-depth conversation about potentially working together with a family unless both parties are at the table. So I think that is an immediate red flag for me. Is that advisor trying to get you both at the table to have the conversation? And then when you're at the table, how are they including you in the conversation? Right? Are they speaking directly to you? Are they looking at you? Are they looking you in the eye and asking you the questions too? Are they pausing to make sure that you both have an opportunity to answer a question? I think those are all major red flags when I think of, anybody interviewing an advisor. I would say those would be some critical things right at the beginning. I'm sure you probably have others too, right? Other red
No,
flags.
well, yeah, and I think the biggest thing, and that's where we can go next, is thinking about what are some questions. Do you have, I mean, two, three, four questions, whatever you think would be fitting of, hey, what are some questions that they should be asking to try to get a better feel for how that advisor works or whether they may be a good fit.
Yeah, I think one of the most important questions for a woman to ask is, how often do you get into conversations with women about their concerns with personal finance in the long term? And the reason I say that is most women, at least in my experience, they are concerned about outliving their money or having to have somebody else take care of them and being able to pay for that, right? And so it's
Right.
all about long term financial stability and having those long term financial concerns taken care of. So when we think about things like long term care, you know, I want to stay in living in my house as long as possible, all those types of things. How is that advisor working with their clients currently to address the longer term financial concerns of women? So all of my questions are really centered around that, right? Most women come to me and they want to know questions about long term care, life insurance. They have more questions along the security lines of things when it comes to
Right.
longevity, because as you said, we outlive men most of the time. And so those are the concerns that women have. And it's very well documented in the financial industry that
Right.
women have different financial concerns. So
Yes.
asking questions that directly hit on those things are so important.
And thinking about, we actually did a episode 6 was specifically what questions, 10 questions to ask your financial advisor if you are preparing for retirement. So understanding how closely did they pay attention to tax law changes? How familiar are they with all the different distribution rules and distribution guidelines when it comes to IRAs and inherited IRAs and all these different types of things? So I shared that in episode 6, but I'm sure there's going to be some similar questions that you probably could share. So for blended families, what are one or two, three questions again that if somebody's in a blended family and they're looking for an advisor, what could they ask to make sure that advisor understands what they're dealing with, what the challenges are that they will be facing?
Right. So I think first and foremost that asking the question straight out in front, how many blended families have you worked with, or do you have experience working with blended families? And can you give me some examples? So asking
That's
for the
great.
story, not specifics, but asking for the story so that you can hear the advisor articulate to you how they've helped such and such blended family. Other questions would be, what are some of the concerns that your blended family clients have, and how are you addressing those? Right?
That's a great
Those are
question.
getting straight into the, okay, we have a blended family. You say you can help us. What are the things that you're doing to help facilitate those discussions? I know that you have these discussions as well too, but are you prepared to bring in our family and help us have those discussions as a blended family unit? Right? Those are critically important, because you want to make sure not that they know your business, but that they know what the plan is.
Right. Anything else specifically that, something I didn't ask? Any questions you feel like are issues you think we ought to talk about, or maybe that I overlooked that you feel like would help women as they're evaluating financial advisors? Anything else you want to add to our conversation?
Yeah, so I don't think you've overlooked anything. I think one thing I would want to make sure that we talk about too is your advisor prepared to sit at the table with your CPA and your estate planning attorney, right? Especially in blended family situations, making sure that that estate planning attorney is part of the conversation and that there's open dialogue back and forth between your advisor and them. That's probably the one of the other big things that I've had to work through with clients is a lot of times advisors aren't versed in how to engage an estate planning attorney or how to engage the CPA in those discussions, especially with, business owners, succession planning, and then also just blended families and estate planning. Those are really big topics that we know a lot about because we've had to have dialogue with them throughout our
Right.
careers. But at the same time, I can't draft one of those plans. You can't draft one of those plans. We're not attorneys, right? And so having the right type of professional at the table and making sure that your advisor is helping quarterback those things. I don't really like to use the quarterback analogy, but quarterbacking those things or being your financial counsel and pulling those parties together.
Is it because you don't like football, or that we're in cowboy
No,
land?
it's just cowboy land. So everything revolves around the quarterbacks around here, right?
Yeah, sore subject. That's all right. We'll stay
I
away
know,
from that.
right?
But the analogy it does typically work pretty well, though.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I think that's really important. Is a lot of times people will come to us not knowing, especially if they haven't been involved in the planning process. They'll come to us and they'll want to know who else can you help me? Who can you connect me with to help me get my estate plan done and help me get my taxes done,
Yes,
or whatever that need is. And I've always viewed, we've been in a couple of different networking groups together, and I've always viewed networking from our perspective. It's not, can I get referrals from this networking group? It's who within this group can be a resource for my client, regardless of what it is, whether has a dollar sign attached to it or not. How can I make sure my clients are taken care of through these other connections with other professionals?
absolutely. And speaking of those networking groups, like we've been in a couple where it's solely focused on blended family units. And
Mhm.
I mean, we've talked to professionals that specialize in helping the family dog, right? Like,
Right. Yeah, that was awesome. That was a great presentation, actually.
it was
What
actually.
happens to the dog after divorce? Nobody thinks about the dog.
But I think that that's important. And there's been, I think, just with the onset of social media and how we can use networking and social media to help us grow as professionals too, speaks to everything as well too. But I've come across someone that helps write parenting plans, unique parenting plans to fit
Yes.
specific needs, right? Like those things are so important, especially when we're dealing with blended families and the concerns that we have long term with them. So
Well, this has been awesome, Lindsay. I would love for you to share, how can people connect with you? Where's the best place to reach you, whether it's on social media, website, whatever you'd like to share. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes. But how can people get in touch with you?
absolutely. Please reach out to me via LinkedIn, or you can go directly to our website, which is www.precisionwealthstrategies.com.
Awesome. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a female business owner or an executive, or more specifically looking for financial guidance as a blended family, please be sure to reach out to Lindsay. In our case, you can go to 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁 Just click that start here button, and that's where you can actually review that 6-step process I referred to earlier, that Simply Retirement Roadmap process. Also, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to share just some other really great resources if you are looking for a financial advisor or a financial planner. We'll also put this in the show notes, but if you are looking for a certified financial planner, a CFP, you can go to www.letsmakeaplan.org or plannersearch.org. If you're specifically looking for an advisor that focuses on women and women's issues, you can visit stronghermoney.com. There's also a site that both Lindsay and I are familiar with, pursestrings.co. It is co, not co.com. It is pursestrings.co. You can find also other different professionals on that site, attorneys, CPAs that focus on women and, again, women's issues. I actually had the co-founders of Purse Strings, Dr. Barb Provost and her daughter Maggie Nielsen, on episode 17, if you'd like to take a listen to that. If you expect or you think you're going to be going through divorce, or maybe you've gone through a divorce recently, you can also check out the divorcetransitionprofessionals.com. That's where you can find financial advisors and other professionals that are very experienced in the divorce world. Lastly, there are also many great volunteer organizations, but these are just two that I'm involved with. Because again, if you're in a financial situation where you're not sure you have the resources, you still need access to financial advice. There's an organization, www.savvyladies.org, SAVVY, ladies.org, that allows you to get financial guidance and coaching from volunteer professionals. And one that I've just become involved in that I'm really excited about, if you're a widow or even a widower and you need financial guidance, you need some coaching, you can go to wingsforwidows.com to get free financial coaching from a certified financial planner. So as always, please like, follow, and share this show. We will see you again on the next episode of the Simply Retirement podcast. In the meantime, please remember that retirement is not the end of the road. It is the start of a new journey.